Carriages roll through the cobblestone streets of Chicago's Levee District. Gas lamps flicker against the velvet night. Behind one set of golden doors, the champagne never stops flowing, and neither does the money. Men of power, from aldermen to millionaires, whisper their confessions to the two sisters who know exactly what those secrets are worth. This wasn't a house of shame. It was a palace of pleasure and profit. Welcome back to James on the Mob. I'm James Jenkins, your host and narrator. In this episode, we step into the Gilded Age. And the story of Ada and Minna Everleigh is a quintessential tale of Gilded Age America. A story of reinvention, ambition, and the complex interplay of capital, corruption, and social hypocrisy. They arrived in Chicago as the Sims sisters, daughters of a ruined Southern family, and transformed themselves into the Everleighs, the undisputed queens of the city's opulent underworld. For 11 years, they operated at the very center of Chicago's shadow economy, building an establishment that was as much a private club for the male elite as it was a brothel. And in an era that offered few paths to financial independence for women, they achieved immense wealth and a unique form of power, becoming pioneers of the sort. Female entrepreneurs who mastered a dangerous and exclusively male domain. At the turn of the 20th century, Chicago was a city of violent contradictions. It was a muscular, burgeoning metropolis, the engine of American industry, and a crucible of architectural innovation. Yet, in the words of one contemporary newspaper, it was also considered the most violent, dirtiest, loud, lawless, ugly, offensive, godless, and oversized, stupid village. Within this chaotic landscape, a semi-sanctioned territory of vice, known as the Levee District, flourished. A world of saloons, gambling dens, and brothels operating under the protection of a deeply corrupt political machine. It was here, amidst the squalor and the splendor, that two sisters, Ada and Minna Everleigh, would build their empire. The legend of the Everleigh sisters was their most carefully constructed and valuable asset. It was a narrative of fallen Southern aristocracy designed to cloak the sordid reality of their profession in a veil of romance and tragedy. This meticulously crafted fiction was not simply a personal defense mechanism, but a sophisticated business strategy that allowed them to command a premium in the competitive marketplace of vice. The story the sisters told to clients, reporters, and eventually their biographers was one of gentility and misfortune. They claimed to have been born outside of Louisville, Kentucky in 1876 and 1878. The daughters of a wealthy lawyer descended from a Virginian who fled Benedict Arnold's invasion in 1781. In this telling story, they were the products of finishing schools and proper social debuts. Women of class and refinement who were tragically forced into their circumstances. This narrative was a powerful marketing tool for the new money industrialists and powerful men of the Gilded Age who formed their clientele. Consorting with the Everleigh sisters was not merely a transaction, it was the purchase of a fantasy, an encounter with women of their own perceived social station. The historical record, painstakingly reconstructed by researchers like Karen Abbott through interviews with a surviving great niece, tells a far different story. Ada Sims was born on February 15, 1864, and her sister Minna on July 13, 1866, in Greene County, Virginia. Their family, the Sims, had indeed been part of the wealthy slave-holding Virginia gentry, but the Civil War had shattered their fortunes. They lost their plantation when they couldn't pay their taxes, and the death of their mother when they were young left them in a state of financial and social decline. Their origins were not in genteel Kentucky, but in the post-war ruin of the Old South. The most brilliant act of reinvention was the adoption of a new surname. As they prepared to enter the world of commercial vice, they shed the name Sims and became the Everleighs. The name was a stroke of branding genius, inspired by their grandmother's habit of signing her personal letters with the charming valediction, Everleigh Yours. Everleigh sounded aristocratic, vaguely English, and far more elegant than their true name. This change was the cornerstone of their new identity, a crucial step in creating a professional persona entirely divorced from their family's past and the realities of their financial situation. One element of the sisters' fabricated story that aligns with historical accounts is their early unhappy marriages. Both their own accounts and subsequent research confirmed that they were married to brothers with the surname Lester. They consistently described these men as abusive and jealous brutes, and the marriages were brief and brutal, both ending in divorce within about a year. In an era when divorce was a profound social stigma for women, this experience seems to have forged in them a deep-seated distrust of men and a powerful resolve to achieve financial independence on their own terms. Following their divorces, they briefly sought a more conventional path to independence for women of their time, joining a traveling theatrical troupe. While acting offered a degree of freedom and mobility, it provided little in the way of financial security, setting the stage for their next, more radical career move. The sisters' entry into the brothel business was, according to their story, a matter of chance. They claimed to have been stranded by their theater company in Omaha, Nebraska around 1895. It was there, armed with a purported $35,000 inheritance from their father's estate, that they made the pivotal decision to open their first brothel. Their timing was impeccable. The city of Omaha was preparing to host the 1898 Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition, a massive event that would draw over 2.6 million visitors and a flood of unattached men with money to spend. The sisters capitalized on this opportunity, opening a second brothel near the exposition grounds. The venture was an overwhelming success. In less than 2 years, they had more than doubled their initial investment, accumulating a fortune of approximately $70,000. This experience in Omaha was more than just profitable. It was a crucial apprenticeship. It proved their business model, honed their management skills, and demonstrated their acumen for identifying and exploiting a lucrative market. Having conquered Omaha, they set their sights on a larger and more affluent city. After scouting locations in New York, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C., they were advised by a D.C. madam named Cleo Maitland that Chicago was a wide-open town and on the upgrade. The stage was set for their arrival in the city that would make them legends. To understand the Everleigh sisters' achievement is to first understand the world they conquered. The Levee District was not merely a collection of brothels. It was a complex, self-contained ecosystem with its own geography, economy, and social hierarchy. It was a city within a city, governed by its own laws and powered by the intertwined forces of politics and vice. The Levee District, so named for its original proximity to the city's wharves along the Chicago River, was the city's officially unofficial red light district from the 1880s until its systematic closure began in 1912. Its location was fluid, pushed southward by the relentless expansion of the city's business district. The old levee, or Custom House levee, was situated in the South Loop, generally bounded by Harrison and Polk Streets to the north and south, and Clark and Dearborn Streets to the east and west. By 1899, when Ada and Minna arrived, the newer and more infamous levee had consolidated into a 4-block area further south, roughly between 18th and 22nd Streets. This district became a contained zone for every imaginable form of vice, a place where the city's illicit desires were quarantined, managed, and most importantly, monetized by the political machine of the First Ward. Following the levee's eventual shutdown, this pattern of containment continued, with vice districts often being displaced into the city's burgeoning black neighborhoods, such as the area around 35th and State Street in Bronzeville, where the official tolerance was higher and enforcement more lax. The levee was a highly stratified world of microcosm of the Gilded Age's class divisions. The quality of sin one could purchase was directly proportional to the amount one was willing to pay. At the apex of this hierarchy were the opulent resorts and clubs that lined South Dearborn Street. These were the elite establishments, catering to the captains of industry, high-ranking politicians, and wealthy tourists. The undisputed queen of this domain was the Everleigh Club, located at 2133 South Dearborn. Its primary competitor for the high-end market was Vic Shaw's resort, just a block away at 2014 South Dearborn. These were the places that sold not just sex, but an experience of luxury, discretion, and perceived respectability. A step below were the mid-tier establishments, a bustling world of saloons and dance halls that offered a more accessible, if less refined experience. Places like Ed Weiss's Capitol and Ike Bloom's Freiburg Dance Hall, located in the vicinity of 22nd and Wabash, combined liquor, live music, and prostitution all under one roof. Themed brothels like the House of All Nations between Archer and Cullerton offered a variety of exotic women to cater to specific tastes. And at the very bottom of the levee's social and economic ladder was the infamous Bed Bug Row. This was a squalid stretch of cheap crib brothels spanning from Dearborn and Federal to 19th and Archer. Here, in tiny, poorly maintained rooms, women, often women of color, offered their services for as little as 25 cents in appalling hygienic conditions. This was the district's grim foundation, a world of desperation far removed from the perfumed parlors of the Everleigh Club. The violence of the district was embodied in saloons like the Bucket of Blood at 19th and Federal, a place so named for the frequency with which its floors had to be cleaned of the aftermath of brawls and stabbings. The Everleigh Club was the sisters' masterpiece, a physical manifestation of their brand of high class and luxurious vice. Upon their arrival in Chicago in 1899, they purchased an existing brothel at the 2131 South Dearborn address from a madam named Effie Hankins for the then pricely sum of $55,000. They promptly fired the existing staff and embarked on a complete and lavish renovation, transforming the building into the most talked about establishment in the city. The club, which opened its doors on February 1, 1900, was designed to overwhelm the senses and project an aura of immense wealth and culture. The interior was a symphony of Gilded Age excess, featuring silk curtains, damasked easy chairs, mahogany tables, oriental rugs, and perfumed fountains in every room. The ceilings were mirrored, and the dinnerware was gold-rimmed china and sterling silver. In 1902, their success allowed them to purchase the adjoining building at 2133 South Dearborn, which they connected internally and dubbed the Annex, doubling the size of their empire. The club was famous for its 12 distinct thematically decorated parlors, each designed to cater to a different mood or fantasy. Among the most famous were the Gold Parlor, the club's showpiece. This room featured a magnificent $15,000 gold leaf piano, gold-rimmed fish bowls, and notoriously $650 solid gold cuspidors. The Japanese throne room, an exotic space designed with oriental motifs. Other themed rooms included a silver parlor, a copper parlor, a rose parlor in the style of Louis XIV, a green parlor in the style of Louis XV, and an oriental music room. To further cultivate an atmosphere of high culture, the club boasted an art gallery filled with gold-framed nudes and a library stocked with expensive, finely bound volumes. This was a crucial part of their strategy. The environment was designed to feel less like a brothel and more like the exclusive private clubs their patrons already frequented, thereby legitimizing the illicit activities that took place within its walls. The Everleigh Club's business model was built on the principle of extreme exclusivity. This was not a place one could simply walk into. From its opening night, the sisters turned away any prospective clients they deemed insufficiently wealthy or refined. Admittance was a privilege granted only to those who could provide a letter of recommendation from an existing member, present an engraved personal card, or receive a formal introduction from Minna or Ada themselves. This strict vetting process made a visit to the club a badge of honor among the city's elite, a testament to one's status and connections. This exclusivity was reinforced by prices that were astronomical for the era. The basic admission fee was $10. A bottle of champagne, a house staple, cost $12. A full dinner was $50 per person, and an evening in the company of one of the women cost a minimum of $50 on top of all the other expenses. The sisters enforced an unwritten but firm rule. Any patron who spent less than $50 during their visit was politely asked not to return. This financial barrier ensured that their clientele remained exclusively among the very wealthy. The club was a stunningly profitable enterprise, with reports suggesting it netted over $100,000 per year, equivalent to millions in today's currency. The sisters divided the labor of running their empire according to their personalities. Ada, the elder and more reserved of the two, was the shrewd businesswoman, the aide. She managed the accounts, handled all financial transactions, and oversaw the crucial task of recruitment. Minna, the charismatic and outgoing general, was the face of the club, greeting guests, managing the social atmosphere, and cultivating the club's high-class ambiance. Ada's recruitment process was as rigorous as their client vetting. She personally interviewed every applicant, seeking out women who were not only beautiful, but also experienced. In her own words, "We do not like amateurs." She required that her employees have a pretty face and figure and be in perfect health. Once hired, the women, whom the sisters poetically referred to as their butterflies, were subject to a process of refinement. They were required to take lessons in etiquette, dance, and even literature, ensuring they could converse intelligently with the club's sophisticated clientele. They were outfitted in the finest couture evening gowns and expensive jewelry, presenting themselves as elegant hostesses rather than common prostitutes. In a move that was both a business necessity and a genuine innovation, the sisters hired a house doctor to perform regular medical examinations on all of the women. This practice protected the health of their employees, maintained the club's reputation for safety, and provided a crucial assurance to their elite patrons. The club was thus a carefully managed social theater, insulating its patrons from the dangers and sordidness of the wider levee and allowing them to indulge in their desires in a space that felt as safe and familiar as their own drawing rooms. The Everleigh Club's opulence and success would have been impossible without the explicit sanction and protection of Chicago's political machine. The Levee District was the economic engine of the First Ward and its aldermen, Michael Hinky-Dink Kenna and John Bathhouse John Coughlin, who were the absolute masters of this domain. The relationship between the madams and the politicians was not one of simple bribery. It was a deeply entrenched, symbiotic partnership that constituted a form of parallel governance. For nearly half a century, the First Ward was the personal fiefdom of Kenna and Coughlin. They were a study in contrast. Michael Hinky-Dink Kenna was a diminutive, quiet, and shrewd political operator who ran the machine from his Clark Street saloon, the Working Man's Exchange. He was the brains of the operation. John Bathhouse John Coughlin, a former bathhouse attendant, was a flamboyant, charismatic, and outrageously dressed public face of the partnership. Together, they were known as the Lords of the Levee. They led a notorious group of corrupt aldermen in the city council known as the Grey Wolves, who perfected the art of graft and boodle. Their power was absolute within the First Ward, maintained through a combination of patronage for their constituents, rampant election fraud, including the colonization of hobos as voters, and total control over the local police and magistrates' court at the Harrison Street Police Station. The business of vice in the levee operated under a highly organized protection racket orchestrated by Kenna and Coughlin. Every saloon, gambling den, and brothel was required to pay for the privilege of operating without interference from the law. This was not a system of random shakedowns, but a regularized, predictable tax that funded the First Ward's political operations. The Everleigh sisters were among the largest taxpayers in this system. They made substantial and regular financial contributions to the First Ward Democratic Organization to ensure their continued operation. Estimates suggest that they paid as much as $10,000 a year in protection money and bribes. The relationship was mutually beneficial. The sisters' profitable enterprise provided a steady stream of revenue for the political machine, and the machine, in turn, provided the essential service of immunity from arrest and prosecution. The lines between business and politics were completely blurred. As Minna Everleigh would later testify, it was common practice for her to always entertain state legislators for free in the club, a clear example of vice being used as a tool of political influence. The ultimate expression of this corrupt but functional system was the annual First Ward Ball. This lavish, debauched affair, hosted by Kenna and Coughlin, was both a political fundraiser and the Levee's premier social event. It was a spectacle where the entire ecosystem of the district came together in a public display of unity. Society thrill seekers, police captains, politicians, prostitutes, and gamblers all mingled under one roof, celebrating the aldermen who made their world possible. At this event, the Everleigh sisters were treated as royalty. A contemporary account describes the ball's grand march being led by a flamboyantly dressed bathhouse John Coughlin, who was flanked by Minna and Ada Everleigh, the brothel queens. This public ceremonial role cemented their status not just as successful businesswomen, but as integral and respected members of the First Ward's ruling class. They were not simply operating within the systems, they were the pillars of it. While Kenna and Coughlin controlled the political levers of the levee, the day-to-day enforcement and organization of its vice rackets fell to the Underworld. During the Everleigh Club's tenure, the undisputed king of this domain was James Big Jim Colosimo. The sisters' ability to thrive depended not only on paying off politicians, but also on successfully navigating a complex and dangerous relationship with the city's premier gangster. Their time in Chicago coincided with a pivotal transition in the nature of organized crime, a shift from a localized vice syndicate to a national crime enterprise. Big Jim Colosimo was the quintessential levee vice lord. An immigrant from Calabria, Italy, he rose from a street sweeper to build a formidable criminal enterprise founded on prostitution, gambling, and racketeering. At his peak, he controlled nearly 200 brothels, including the Victoria and the Saratoga, and his operations reportedly earned him $50,000 per month. His public face was his popular restaurant and nightclub, Colosimo's Cafe, located at 2126 South Wabash Avenue. Colosimo's power was derived from his intimate connection to the First Ward political machine. He had served as a precinct captain and later as a bagman for Kenna and Coughlin, collecting protection payments and dispensing bribes. This role placed him at the nexus of politics and crime, making him the essential enforcer who managed the vice industries that the aldermen protected. For a high-stakes operation like the Everleigh Club, a working relationship with Colosimo was not optional. One source explicitly identifies him as the middleman for the sisters' protection payments, suggesting a direct and necessary business arrangement. His own wife, Victoria Moresco, was a successful madam herself, which would have made him both a powerful overlord and a knowledgeable peer in the business. The criminal landscape of Chicago began to shift dramatically in 1909. Facing increasing pressure from Black Hand extortion gangs, Colosimo imported a new enforcer from Brooklyn, his wife's nephew, the coolly intelligent and business-minded John Torrio. Torrio quickly proved himself to be more than just muscle. He became Colosimo's top lieutenant, expertly managing the vast network of brothels. In 1919, Torrio would in turn bring his own protege from Brooklyn to Chicago, a young Al Capone. The advent of national prohibition in 1920 created a schism between Colosimo and Torrio. Torrio recognized the immense unprecedented profits to be made in bootlegging, a federal crime that would require a new level of organization and violence. Colosimo, however, was content with his lucrative vice empire. He had recently divorced Victoria and married a young singer by the name of Dale Winter, and was reluctant to rock the boat by entering a new dangerous racket that would attract federal attention. This disagreement proved fatal. On May 11, 1920, Big Jim Colosimo was shot and killed in the vestibule of his own restaurant. The murder was almost certainly arranged by Torrio, who immediately seized control of the gang. This assassination marked a watershed moment in the history of American organized crime. It signaled the end of the old-style localized vice syndicate and the birth of the modern Chicago outfit, a diversified criminal corporation built on the immense profits of bootlegging and destined for national infamy under Torrio's successor, Al Capone. The Everleighs had managed to exit the stage just before the nature of the game changed entirely, and it is an open question whether their particular brand of genteel vice could have survived the bloody beer wars that were to come. The Everleighs' most direct and formidable competitor was Vic Shaw, a madam whose real name was Emma Elizabeth Fitzgerald. She operated a successful and high-class resort at 2014 South Dearborn Street, placing her establishment just one block from the Everleigh Club and in direct competition for the same wealthy patrons. The rivalry between Shaw and the Everleigh sisters was reportedly intense and personal. Shaw was said to have hated the sisters and felt deeply threatened by their overwhelming success and notoriety. While she also catered to an upscale market, her operation apparently lacked the polished refinement of the Everleigh Club. Reports suggested that she treated her employees harshly, in stark contrast to the carefully cultivated image of the Everleighs as benevolent protectors of their butterflies. This bitter rivalry exploded into a public scandal on January 9, 1910. On that night, Nathaniel Ford Moore, a prominent and wealthy young golfer and the son of the president of the Rock Island Railway Company, died of a narcotic overdose inside Vic Shaw's brothel. Moore had reportedly spent the early part of the evening at the Everleigh Club before moving on to Shaw's establishment. Facing ruin from the scandal of a high-profile death on her premises, Shaw made a desperate and malicious move. She attempted to frame Minna Everleigh for Moore's death. However, Minna learned of the plot before Shaw could execute it, forcing Shaw to report the death to the police herself. The resulting inquest and media attention were devastating. Shaw's resort was closed, and the incident provided powerful ammunition for the burgeoning anti-vice crusade, demonstrating that even the Levee's most elite establishments were dens of death and depravity. If the Everleighs represented the glamorous facade of the Levee, Maurice and Julia Van Beaver embodied its horrific core, the organized trafficking of women popularly known as white slavery, or more commonly known today as human trafficking. The Van Beavers were key figures in the Levee's Underworld, operating as partners of Big Jim Colosimo. They ran several establishments that served as fronts for their trafficking ring, including a saloon and brothel called the Parrots at 2101 Armour Street, and another brothel known as the White City at 2102 South Dearborn Street. Their operation was systematic and brutal. They ran an interstate ring that lured young and vulnerable women from cities like St. Louis to Chicago with the false promises of high-paying, legitimate jobs in restaurants or department stores. Once in Chicago, the women were trapped, often through debt peonage, and forced into prostitution in the Van Beavers or Colosimo's brothels. The activities of the Van Beaver gang became a primary focus for the reformers and prosecutors like attorney Clifford G. Rowe, who saw their operation as the epitome of the social evil they were fighting. Maurice Van Beaver was eventually arrested in 1909 and convicted for his role in the trafficking ring, a major victory for the anti-vice movement. The existence of such brutal operations was crucial for the reformers' narrative. While the luxury of the Everleigh Club might have seemed a distant and even glamorous sin to the general public, the stories of girls tricked and enslaved by the likes of the Van Beavers provoked genuine moral outrage, providing the political will to cleanse the entire district. The fame of the Everleigh Club was built not only on its opulent decor, but on the legendary status of its clientele. The sisters' strict admission policies ensured that their parlors were filled with the wealthiest and most powerful men in Chicago, and indeed, the world. A visit to 2131 South Dearborn Street was a shared secret among an international elite, a rite of passage that connected industry, politics, high society, and the arts in a clandestine fraternity of indulgence. The club's most celebrated international guest was undoubtedly Prince Heinrich of Prussia, the brother of German Kaiser Wilhelm II. The prince visited Chicago on March 3, 1902, during a tour of the United States. While the city's leaders had arranged a full slate of official receptions, parades, and banquets, the prince had one specific, non-negotiable request. He wanted to visit the world-famous Everleigh Club. The sisters, masters of hospitality, prepared a special bacchanalia for their royal guest, complete with elaborate food, dancing, and theatrical performances. The visit became the source of one of the era's most enduring legends, the origin of drinking champagne from a woman's slipper. According to the story, during a dance performance for the prince, one of the women kicked so high that her slipper flew off her foot. As it landed, it spilled a glass of champagne. A gallant member of the prince's entourage is said to have picked up the champagne-filled shoe and drunk from it, an act of chivalry that reportedly started an international trend. The visit, though kept out of the official press, cemented the Everleigh Club's global reputation as a destination for even the highest echelons of royalty. If Prince Heinrich's visit represented the club's glamour, the death of Marshall Field Jr. represented its capacity for scandal and its entanglement with the city's most powerful families. On November 22, 1905, Field Jr., the heir to the Marshall Field's department store fortune, suffered a gunshot wound that would prove fatal several days later. The official story, meticulously managed by the powerful Field family and dutifully reported by a compliant press, was that the shooting was a tragic accident. The family claimed that Field Jr. had shot himself in his dressing room at his mansion at 1919 South Prairie Avenue while cleaning a new automatic revolver in preparation for a hunting trip. However, a persistent and detailed rumor immediately began to circulate throughout the city. Marshall Field Jr. had not been shot at home, but at the Everleigh Club. The story, suppressed by the newspapers fearful of losing massive advertising revenue from the Marshall Field store, suggested that Field was a regular at the club and had been shot there during an altercation with a prostitute, after which his unconscious body was secretly transported the few blocks back to his Prairie Avenue home to stage the accident. A rival madam, probably Vic Shaw, even maliciously accused the Everleigh sisters of his murder. Years later, in 1913, the rumor gained a stunning corroboration when a woman named Vera Scott, a former Everleigh Club prostitute, confessed to the Los Angeles police that she had been the one who shot Field Jr. She claimed that during an argument in a private room at the club, she had grabbed his revolver and it had accidentally discharged. She further alleged that she was later paid thousands of dollars in hush money by Marshall Field Sr. to leave the country. While her confession remains unverified, the incident has become an indelible part of the club's lore, a dark mystery that highlights the immense power wielded by the city's elite to control narratives and protect their reputations, even in the face of death. Beyond these headline-grabbing events, the club maintained a steady clientele of the city's most notable figures. The list of reported regulars reads like a who's who of early 20th century American culture and industry. Novelist Theodore Dreiser, acclaimed actor John Barrymore, and world heavyweight boxing champion Jack Johnson. The club was so central to the lives of the city's movers and shakers that its telephone number, Calumet 412, was a vital piece of information. Overnight clerks at the city's newspapers knew if they needed to find one of their reporters after hours, the first and best place to call was the Everleigh Club. This fact alone speaks volumes about the establishment's function, not merely as a brothel, but as an unofficial after-hours nexus for the men who ran Chicago. For 11 years, the Everleigh sisters presided over their empire of vice, protected by their political connections and the patronage of the city's most powerful men. But by the second decade of the 20th century, the political and social climate of Chicago and the country was changing. The rising tide of the progressive era reform movement, which sought to clean up urban corruption and impose a new standard of public morality, would ultimately prove to be a force that even the lords of the levee could not contain. In the end, the sisters' downfall would be precipitated not by a police raid or a rival's plot, but by their own act of self-promotion. By 1910, the open town atmosphere that had allowed the levee to flourish was under sustained attack. Religious organizations, temperance groups like the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and civic reformers began a vocal and effective public campaign against the district, focusing on the horrors of white slavery and the corrupting influence of commercialized vice. Responding to this mounting public pressure, the reform-minded mayor, Carter H. Harrison Jr., took a decisive step. In 1910, he appointed the Chicago Vice Commission, a body tasked with investigating the scale of prostitution in the city and recommending solutions. The commission's final report, published in 1911 under the title The Social Evil in Chicago, was a landmark document that sent shockwaves through the city and the nation. It provided a stark statistical portrait of the vice industry, documenting nearly 600 brothels and estimating that some 5,000 professional prostitutes operated in Chicago. In its detailed expose, the report singled out one establishment for special mention. The Everleigh Club, it declared, was probably the most famous and luxurious house of prostitution in the country. This official designation transformed the club from a subject of rumor and legend into the primary and politically necessary target of the reform movement. At the height of their success, in a move that demonstrated both their pride and their fatal misreading of the changing times, the sisters decided to advertise. They commissioned and published a small, elegant promotional booklet titled The Everleigh Club, Illustrated. This pamphlet was intended as a tasteful marketing tool, a way to showcase the unparalleled luxury of their establishment to a select audience. It featured high-quality photographs of the club's opulent themed parlors, the Gold Room, the Japanese Throne Room, the Rose Parlor, and contained prose extolling its sumptuous furnishings and artistic decorations. Ironically, this very attempt to codify their brand and market their exclusivity became the instrument of their destruction. A copy of the pamphlet eventually found its way into the hands of Mayor Harrison. The mayor, already under immense pressure from the Vice Commission's damning report, was now faced with undeniable self-published proof of the city's most notorious vice den brazenly advertising its services. The pamphlet provided the final piece of political cover he needed to act decisively. The sisters' fame, once their greatest asset, had become their greatest liability. Their mastery of branding and self-promotion, the very philosophy that had built their empire, ultimately proved incompatible with the illicit nature of their business in an era of reform. The end came swiftly. On the direct orders of Mayor Harrison, the Everleigh Club was officially and permanently closed on October 24, 1911. In a final gesture that was uniquely characteristic of the city's long-standing tolerance for vice, the sisters were permitted to host one last grand farewell party on their final night in business, an event that was by all accounts a rager. Ada and Minna Everleigh retired as extraordinarily wealthy women, with an estimated fortune of over $1 million in cash, jewelry, and other assets. They embarked on an extensive tour of Europe, and upon their return, attempted to settle into a quiet retirement on Chicago's west side. However, their notoriety preceded them, and they were driven out by the protests of their disapproving new neighbors. They finally found anonymity in New York City. Resuming their former married name of Lester, they lived out the remainder of their lives in quiet obscurity, a world away from the levee. They became patrons of the arts, hosted poetry circles, and participated in local women's clubs, embracing the very Victorian femininity their club had been designed to subvert. Minna died in New York in 1948, aged 82. Ada returned to her native Virginia, where she lived with relatives until her death in 1960 at the age of 96. So goes the story of the Everleigh sisters. Their success was a testament to their remarkable business acumen. They understood their market with perfect clarity, recognizing that their wealthy clients desired not just sex, but a fantasy of class, culture, and discretion. They created the girlfriend experience way before it was in vogue, and created a powerful brand built on a fabricated narrative of fallen aristocracy and manifested in an empire of unparalleled luxury. They masterfully navigated a treacherous landscape dominated by corrupt politicians and ruthless gangsters, becoming integral players in the Levee's alternative political economy. However, they failed to see the writing on the wall that spelled reform. But in the end, they died peacefully and very wealthy. And in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on the Everleigh sisters, or let me know who you'd like me to cover next. I'm James Jenkins. If you've enjoyed this trip to the Gilded Age, you know what to do. Hit that like thumb, subscribe and share, and be on the lookout for another episode of James on the Mind. And remember, life is short, so don't whack it off. See yous.